Hi. In this video, I'm going through the new things added in version 1.5 of Waveform Generator. I skipped version 1.4 because in 1.3 I introduced a bug in the version check. So if I release this version as 1.4, the version check would not would not recognize that it was a new version. So I simply skipped version number 1.4. In this version, I have made a lot of improvements to wavetables. For example, audio wavetables can now be imported, and you can import sounds from other wavetables into your wavetables. And also in this version, I've added playback of wavetables. It's a simple playback, but in previous version, you could only listen to one of the slots at a time. Now you can cycle through them manually. Due to many of these changes, the database have changed in this version. So the first time you run version 1.5, it will tell you that your database needs to be updated, and it will do this update automatically. I suggest you do a backup of your database before updating to this version. So if anything should happen, you still have your original database. I don't think anything will happen, but to be on the safe side, I suggest you do it. In this video, I will go through most of the things that have changed in this version. However, you can, in the help menu, you find this menu item history. And here you see a full history of all the things that have changed, the things have been fixed and so on. So if you watch this movie or you only watch some of it, you can look in this history to see the changes. In previous version, there was no playback of wavetables, but I added simple playback of wavetables in this version. So if we choose this waveform, in previous version, you could hear a single slot at a time. But in this version, as I said, I added playback to the wavetable as well. If you double click the wavetable, this is how it would look in the old version. In this version, I added all of these playback controls down here. And it shows in blue the entire wavetable, and you can choose to include the intermediate also. But in red, it shows the active slots. And you can see here in this case, it's slots 1 of 10. And if I enable playback, you can see you can enable playback either with the mouse or you can use F1 to start playback and F2 to stop playback. And you can cycle through the slots with the mouse, but you can also use F3 and F4. So press F1 to start playback, and then F4 to cycle through. And if we can make these steps more gradual by adding more slots. So if we adjust the slot count to 2, 5, 6 and press F2, F1, and then press and hold F4. And if you want to, you can also filter the individual slots. When you play back the sound for a single waveform, you have a filter strength, but here for wavetable, I only have a filter. And enabling this filter will be the same as setting the filter strength to 1. And it's, as you can see, it's both the illustration and the playback. So this is the new playback feature added in this version. In this version, I also added the ability to import audio wavetables. For example, if you buy a software wavetable synthesizer, often those synthesizers are bundled with audio wavetables you can use with that synthesizer. But now in this version, you can also import those audio files and use them here, and you can change those wavetables, or you can use the individual slots of those wavetables as building blocks to other wavetables you're building. In this aspect, I ask you to play by the rules and respect the copyright and license agreements for those things. I'm pretty sure that whatever your use of wavetables, as long as you use it yourself in your own music and you don't distribute the wavetables to others, it will be fine. But please respect the copyright and license rules. In previous version, the only audio the program could import was WAV files. In this version, I also added support for FLAC files and AIFF files, at least when you import. Export is still restricted only to WAV files, but import, you can now import FLAC and AIFF files. When you import an audio wavetable, the program does not know how many slots that wavetable contains, or how many samples there are per slots. So the program will need you to answer that. Here, let's try to import an audio file as a wavetable. And this is actually one of the wavetables that comes with Serum. I just choose a random one. I know for a fact that these are 2048 samples per waveform. So the program, if I choose this number, it will know there's 6 slots in this wavetable. But as I said, the program have no means to know that. So that's why it listed like this. It tried to guess with a different number of samples per waveform there are. You can try to say, okay, I think there's 512, and you can see down here, if there's 512 samples per slot, you have 24 slots in total. Here you can see the active slots I select here. It's in this upper right corner. And these 8 will normally show the 3 preceding waveforms that comes before this one and the 4 that comes after. However, in this case, I have selected a second slot, so there cannot be 3 slots in front. So it will show 1 slot in front of it, the selective slot, and then the 6 following slots. And all of this is to help you choose the right amount of samples per waveform, or if you instead know how many slots there are. For example, if you think there are 15 slots, you can choose that also. In this case, as I said, I know there's 2048. So it knows it's these slots. And if you look at these, it appears that these are full cycles of waveforms. So we think we chose the right number. I have imported many third-party waveforms while testing this, and most of them have been 2048 samples per waveform or per slots. So when you are sure you picked the right number of samples per slot, or the correct number of slots, you simply press OK. It asks for the name of this wavetable. It will suggest the name of the file in the audio file, and it appears I already imported this before, as it append this _1. So you see, this one I imported previously, and then this one. And when you look at it in the program, it simply appears as a normal wavetable. So here you see the slots, you can cycle through them, and as we saw before with the playback, you can double click or press F2, then press F1 to playback and F4 to cycle. Let's try to import another. I just choose a random. When you import these, you can choose to normalize the slots individually. Normally, the entire file is normalized, meaning you could have one of the slots that would have a lower amplitude, so it not reach the top or not reach the bottom here. And by enabling normalize, all of the slots will be individual normalized. And this is on by default. This, I will return to describing this feature of reducing draw sections. And that's simply because when you import a WAV file, each slot will be oversampled to contain 4096 samples, because that will make some operations in the software easier. This reduce sample sections will try to reduce the number of samples in the file. And the way it does it, if you have, it doesn't appear to be the case here, but if you have samples that are linear aligned, so they form a straight line, you can keep the first and you can keep the last and throw away all the samples in between, because they can simply be found with linear interpolation. And that will reduce the size of these files. It will both reduce the size in the database, it will reduce the size in memory, and it will also reduce the time it takes to load and save that waveform, because there are less data. This checkbox will default to a new setting I've added in the software, and I will return to that later in this video. Just know you can choose to reduce them. If you want them as close as the original, you should not reduce them, but personally I reduce the one I import, because I don't think there is no audible difference between them. In this version, I made a lot of changes to the program to make it more efficient when it comes to wavetables. And that's simply because, as I said, each of the slots are oversampled. So in this case, this waveform have a lot of, it had 256 slots, and if each of them contains 4096 samples, that's a lot of data. For a single wavetable, it doesn't matter. But if you start to import a lot of third-party audio wavetables, it will take up a lot of space on your disk and memory and so on. So for that reason, this program have been made a lot more efficient when it comes to wavetables. One of the things is that reduce feature I told you about previously. Another feature is when you start the program, it will not load all wavetables into memory. In the past, all waveforms are loaded into memory from the database when you open the program, simply to make it faster to work with. And that's still the case. In previous version, also all data regarding the wavetables was loaded into memory. But this is no longer the case. So let me close down the program and start it up again. Here I have closed down the program and started it again. So if we look at these third party, you will not see this value down here. It's something that's only available in my development version. This number is the number of milliseconds it have taken to generate this image. And because it's just loaded from the database, it have not been generated in this this time we executed the program. It just showed this very large number. The asterisk tell me this illustration have been cast to disk, and this exclamation point tells me that the data regarding this wavetable have not been loaded. The only thing loaded into the program is the name, this info, and this illustration. In previous version, it had to load all the data. It had to decipher the data. Actually, the data are compressed in the file. So it had to load them from the database. It had to decompress it. It had to create the wavetable, create all the slots in order to generate this info and in order to generate these thumbnails. In this version, the info and the thumbnail was saved to the database. So it's simply been loaded. And again, that's why we have this asterisk telling me that these data have not been loaded into memory. When I double click the file, the wavetable, it will have to read those data from the database before it can present the form. And that's the reason I gray out this tree view in order to tell you that it's doing something. Right now, it's still doing something because you're editing the file. Now all these data have been read into memory, and we can work with the wavetable. We can do whatever we want. And when we finish, we just click OK. When we click OK, it will again generate this info, generate this illustration, save them to disk, and we are now able to free the data from memory if we need to. So this version, it will consume less memory because it will decache some of the data for these wavetables. So if you have to work with them again, perhaps it will have to reload the data. And this is all controlled by two new settings. We have this auto decache of wavetable data. It means when you do some operations, for example, if I were to export all of my wavetables, there will probably be some wavetables that are still on disk, so the data for those wavetables will have to be read into memory before it can actually export them. But after the export operation, it will decache those data, so it will not take up a lot of memory. And there is another setting that I have chosen to call aggressive decache. In this case, I just edit a single wavetable. I loaded this one into memory, and you no longer see the exclamation point down here. As I said, it's only in my debug version. It means all of the data for this wavetable is still in memory. However, if I enable this aggressive decache, when I edit a wavetable and I save it, it will now, you see, you have this exclamation point again. The data for this wavetable is no longer in memory. So if I double click, it will have to reload it again. So it makes the program a little bit slower. It's not a lot, but editing a single waveform, it's not a big deal. But of course, if I were to export all of my wavetables a lot of time, it will add a lot of the time it takes to export them. But at the same time, it requires less memory. And as I said, these imported audio wavetables, they're really large. So unless you have a lot of memory, I suggest you use the default cache setting. Normally, I use this setting where I have an auto decache, and then I don't use the aggressive, meaning if I edit a single wavetable, you see this one still remains in memory. I don't see the exclamation point. So editing a single waveform, a single wavetable, that will be in memory. But if I were to export all of these, those that are loaded during the export will be freed again. So it will consume less memory. And that's especially when you export all of the wavetables, or if you choose to clone a folder containing a lot of wavetables, that will really consume a lot of memory. So this is some of the improvement I have made to wavetables in this version. Okay, let's look at the remaining things changed in this version. Beside importing a wavetable an audio wavetable as a wavetable. You can also import it as a folder and then make a waveform for each of the slots in that wavetable. I have this third-party folder here in the waveforms tree view, and we choose to let's move it up. You can see it. We choose to import an audio wavetable, and I just choose a random one, and we have selected here the correct number of samples per waveform, so we just click OK, and it will simply suggest the name of the file we are importing, and it will make a folder with that name, and then it will make a waveform for each of the slots in that wavetable. I suggest you don't actually use this feature unless you really want to, because there is a better way to do it if you need these individual slots in the wavetable. If you choose to import these audio wavetable as wavetables, I suggest you don't import them here as I just showed. Instead, what you can do, let's delete this folder with all its content. If I create a new, for example, advanced waveform, I can simply load a wavetable that's already in the database. So if I choose this one, I simply double click it. It will load, it'll take a few seconds, and then I can see all the slots that is available in that wavetable, and I can either click OK or simply double click one of the slots. Now this slot is imported here, so we didn't need it as a single waveform. The same you can do if you build your own wavetable. You now have a new menu item here with the shortcut control, shift insert. Again, you choose the wavetable you want to import from, and it takes again a few seconds to load. This time when I load it into another wavetable, I have all these check marks choosing what I want to import. Let me show another wavetable. If I import from this basic one, this wavetable both include non-intermediate slots and intermediate slots. By default, it only suggests to import the non-intermediate. And if I click OK, those four are the ones that's actually loaded. So let's delete those again and choose to import. And choose the same wavetable. Here, you can choose all, intermediate or non-intermediate. Here with all and select. You'll simply select all, or you can do it manually. Click the first, shift click the last, and select them all this way. And if I click OK, it will be loaded as it is with these intermediate. And these intermediate are simply imported as intermediate. They're still intermediate. Another thing you can do is you can also simply import and select all again. But by checking this one, we ask it to resample these intermediate into waveforms. So instead of being intermediate, they'll be resampled into hand-drawn waveform. So now this one is not an intermediate, it's simply been resampled into a hand-drawn waveform. So again, you can import a wavetable as a folder with a lot of waveforms, but there's no need to. If you plan to import them as a wavetable, I suggest you do that. And this way you can actually build your own wavetables using
waveforms you import from other and different. For example, I can choose to import this one, deselect everything, and just choose, let's choose 3 random. Say I want to import these 3. And we can go in here and say I want to import from this one. It doesn't contain a lot, so let's import everything, and again import from this one. We just did. So let's deselect and then just select a few. So this way we now have a wavetable built with the slots from different other wavetables. But as I said again, please respect the copyright and license of the audio wavetables that you're importing from. I think I showed it already, but let's show this feature. In the past, when you inserted some things, new things, they could be inserted out of view. For example, if I want to do a new, let's do a new folder and call it YouTube. In the previous version, when I added this, it would insert the YouTube folder the correct way in the table, but it will be out of view because it will be in the bottom. Now in this version, it will scroll to the new item you insert. When I import new wavetables, they will, the author, if I choose to, I will be set as the author of this wavetable, even though it's coming from Serum. And that's because everything you do will be set to the author you have entered here in settings. But in this version, you can actually change the author. So I like giving credit where credit is deserved. So let's do a new folder. Call it, for example, Serum. And then I can move these wavetables into the folder. And I can use this set author. And we can see the author is Exfer. And it takes a few seconds, and now you will see the author it have been changed to for these files, so you know who made them. If I do make any change to a wavetable, actually as if I just save it again, the author will be changed to what you have in the settings. So now it will be reverted to infinite noise, so I can again just right click it and set author just for a single file. And it does remember, I think it's the last 20 authors you have set. You can, it will save, and you can simply pick it from this list or into something else if it's an author you don't have used before. In this version, I also made some small changes to the expression waveforms. So let's do an advanced and set it as an expression. And if you click here, expression help, I've added these. They are actually functions, but I chose to group them here and call them curves. The first sync is a bit special because it produces both positive and negative values. You see the sync waveform, and it goes through this cycle. And what you can do use it for is you can use it as it is here, but you can also use it as part of another expression. For example, say sync of x2. Then we simply repeat it, and for example, we can multiply it by a sine of x, and you get this waveform. Likewise, we have this new S-curve. If I do an S-curve of x, as you probably know, that the wavetables generated, the waveforms generated as an expression, the input value x will begin here at 0 and go all the way over here to where it's a 2 pi. And the output of the S-curve, when x is 0, it simply outputs 0. And when x is 2 pi, it ends up here at plus 1. So we have this S-curve. And again, you can use it as it is, but it's meant to be used in your expression. If I multiply by 2, so you don't see any change. It will begin at 0 and it will end at 2, but since it will automatically be normalized, you don't see it. But what we can do is if we subtract 1, before we had output values from 0 to plus 2. Now, by subtracting 1, we have output values from minus 1 to plus 1, and in between we have this S-curve. And here, let's copy in another. Here we simply choose the S-curve multiplied by 2, and then simply time it by pi. We have this waveform. Let's move on. Another one I made in this version was a sinusoid. And it simply produced this sinusoid where it begins at 0 when the x is 0, and here at 2 pi it ends at 1, and in between we have this sinusoid curve. And we can add REV in front to reverse it. So here we have a convex shape, and here adding reverse, we have a concave shape. And again, the purpose is to use this with other expressions. So here is a thing we can use it for. And in the same way, we have an ellipsoid. And it's same principle, just another shape. At 0, it outputs 0. At 2 pi, it output plus 1. And we have the reverse version of it. And here we see how it can be used. So these were the changes made to the expressions in this version. Simply these new curve commands you can use. A fun thing is, I actually one day I was playing with ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT to come up with some expressions for me, and it was actually fun because I could tell ChatGPT to do certain things. For example, that in mathematics terms, if you wanted to use one expression for the first part, and then do something else for the last part, you use in math you use the expression for, where you say for x less than pi, for example. We have x beginning here at 0, ending at 2 pi, so pi is here in the middle. Whereas here you will have to do it as an if command. So you can tell ChatGPT to, instead of using that for, use an if, and then tell it how to use that if. And for example, in math, if you'd want to do, I don't know if it will look correct, but if we do an x lifted to the power of 2, this is how you would write it in math, and that's the expression that ChatGPT will express, where here you have to use the power commands. The correct way to write this was as a power, and then x comma 2. this is the correct expression. And again, you can tell ChatGPT to actually do it like this, that when it does a power, it have to use the power command, and then you can actually just copy and paste the commands it's generate. I think I saved. Here, fun with ChatGPT. These are expression that actually ChatGPT generated when I asked it to do so. And I could actually tell ChatGPT to make sure that it begins at 0 and ends at 0. I used the Wolfram add-on for ChatGPT, and then you can actually ask it to, in ChatGPT, generate and show you the waveform it generates. So if you want to play with these expression and have a hard time coming up with these by yourself, you can do it like that. And here I just added some intermediate, so I gradually shift between the one it's generated. As I told you in previous version, waveforms generated as an expression are actually the slowest one to use in the software. And for that reason, I had some limitations put in. Let's do an expression here inside an wavetable. And let's just do something very simple. Sine of x divided by 2. We have this one, and instead of 2, we can use the slot index, since we can change it very quickly. So we have this command. Now it have the slot index have the value of 1, and if we look at the expression, we see x divided by 1. We can choose to do like this. So now it will be actually x divided by a half. And then we can go through all these slot indexes one by one. I think what I want was this. Yeah, it's better. We simply add, we increase each time we increase the slot index, we increase the frequency by a half. So let's save this one. And what you can do is you can now generate multiple slots based on this expression. That part is not new. Here it defaults to 16, but let's increase it to 32. It takes a little time, and then it generates all these. And apparently there's nothing new to this. You can do that in previous versions also. But what changed in this one is when you generate all of those expressions, then generated in serial. They're generated one at a time. In this new version, I added a new setting where I allow you to do it in a threaded way. So actually you can use multiple of your CPU core to generate those slots, so they're generated faster, but still these expressions are slow. So let's save it as exp test. We have it here. Now in settings, we have this this new one, allow expression waveforms being evaluated, threaded. Right now it's disabled. So let's delete the lock. And then we ask it to generate these slots. In previous version, you could only generate 32 slots, and the reason I put that limit is because it takes time. But in this version, I have removed that restriction. If you choose more than 32, it will ask you if you're sure you want to generate more. You get this one. Generating more than 32 can take some time. Are you sure you want? Yes. And now it will generate those 64 slots. And as you saw, it took a little time. Let's go out without accepting anything. And if you look the log, we can see how long time it took to generate these. So if we go to settings and we enable this, allow it to run threaded, we can double click it and again choose 64. Accept it will take some time. And it actually took a lot less time. So by allowing this to run threaded, before it took 2.165 seconds, and now it took almost just 1 second. So we about half the time by enabling that threading. But still, even though it's enabled, if you want to do the maximum you can, it will take time. That's 256 and accept it. And I'll pause the video. No, actually no reason. It went fairly quick. If we show the log, it actually only took 4 seconds to generate all those expression wavetables. So as of now, I only use this new setting. This one, allow expression. It's only used for when you generate those wave slots. In the past, I've had some issues with running the expression waveforms threaded, but this no longer seems to be the case. So this one is enabled by default. However, if you see any problems, it's waveforms that's not generated, you have the option to disable it here, and it will work like it did in the previous version of the program. Another change in this version when it comes to the wavetables is you can now convert all the waveforms into basic additive waveforms. And it will only, it will not touch the intermediate, it will only change these one. So now these are basic additive waveforms. You can also resample or convert all the slots into hand-drawn waveforms. And when you choose this all, it will actually also take all the intermediate and convert them. So now they're all changed. So if you use that feature in the past version, you would have to do it in multiple steps, but now you can do it in one step if you need to. Let's look at one of the things I changed to the basic additive. So let's just convert this one to a basic additive. Here we have a square waveform, and the square waveform is all the odd harmonics. If I wanted to do something, I want to leave these as they are, but I wanted to put something in between. I would have to do it manually, put something there, and so on. However, in this version, I added an extra sign to a chart you can use in the harmonic, and that's the exclamation point. Let's first just quickly go over these. For example, if I choose plus, and I, instead of freehand, set it to linear, and let's clear it so we have a blank canvas. If it's plus, all of them will be set to a positive value, hence they're all blue. If I say plus minus, then the first will be positive, the next will be negative, and so on. And you can choose, instead of linear, you can choose to draw it in an S-curve or something. This is not new. Let's return to the square. What we can do now is we can use the question mark as part of this harmonic pattern. So if I say, let's do a question mark minus. The question mark means it will not change what it is. So this one is a positive value. Let's change the first one to a negative, just to see it. So, and we can choose this one also. So let's keep this, and when I start drawing all the one that line up, this pattern will be repeated as many harmonics there are, where all of the odd ones will be question mark, hence they'll not be changed. All of the even one will be minus, hence they will be set. These in between will be set to this minus. So if I start drawing, you can fill out the blanks like this. This one and this one that already was negative, the remain being negative, hence the remain being red. We can undo a few times. Now we have this one, so it's more easy to see. Sorry, I need to change the pattern again. Question mark minus. So if you need to do something like this, you have this change to the harmonic pattern. As I said, when you import these audio wavetables, they're really large because the program is oversampling them. So even though it compresses the data, it saves to the database. These will really add to the size of your database. Right now, I'm using my development database. But in my personal database, I think I imported about 1,300 third-party wavetables from audio files. And I think my database was 1.5 gigabyte before. I started importing all of those, and I think it's now about 8 gigabytes. So it really added to the size of the database. And therefore, it can be a good idea to reduce the size of these files. And the way it works is that we now have this. We had the setting in previous version, but I changed it a bit. I can set it to auto reduce the waveforms as I draw them, or when they're resampled. And we have this new setting, the linear angle degree, and it simply look. Let's illustrate it with a hand-drawn waveform. Let's assume these are samples I'm drawing and not line segments. Oh, let's just do something else here. Let's assume these are samples, individual samples from the file we're importing. When we have 3 samples that are linear aligned, for example, the angle between this sample and this sample is the same as the angle between this sample and this sample, we can actually remove this sample because all the points in between can be found with linear interpolation. So we can remove this sample. Likewise, we can remove these two samples because from here to here it's also linear, and all points in between can linear interpolation. And if I choose this reduce, it's actually what it will do, and it will suggest the two values you put in setting. This one is how much difference we allow to be between the angle between this one, and the angle between this one and this one. It's set to a very low, so it will more or less only remove samples that are not 100% linear, but almost 100% linear. So simply reducing a lot less, for example, 0.1 degree, you will remove a lot more samples, but it will be less accurate. And of course, if you put in a higher value, it will be even less. And you have this one, it's these are linear segments, but if it was samples, you can turn those linear samples into these linear segments. In this development version, I have this feature down here. It shows me how many sections are there and which type are they. So here, pressing reduce, it will reduce the sample, and I can see how much data it actually remove. And here you now have fewer sections because so that's the same thing you can do when you import. When I import an sample here, let's just see if I enable that feature. No. You can manually do it, but I simply enable this automatic reduce. So when I import a wavetable, it will do it automatic. So let's import an audio wavetable. Let's just use some. Let's just pick some random one. I think actually this one is very good. And if I double click it, it's loaded. And if I double click one of these, you can actually see that these part have been turned in. These red dots tell me that it's different sections. If I did not enable this feature to resample it and reduce it, this will simply be 4096 individual sample values, so it will be a lot of values in the file. But now, instead, it's reduced into these segments. You have line segments from here to here. You might have a single point here in between, and that's what you see with these hand-drawn. You have 4 samples here, where it adjusts the range from going up here to going horizontal, and again down here and up here and up here. But you really reduce the amount of samples used to store these files by enabling that feature. And again, it's regarding this. If I do, let's change this one to a sign. And if I turn it into a hand-drawn, you can see that it's 4069 instead of 4096. So actually, when I have enabled that feature, it reduces, so it removes a few samples, and as long as the angle between two samples are less than this value here, it will remove. So it have removed a few samples, but not a lot. If I put it at 0.1 and ask it to reduce, you can see it actually reduces it by removing a lot of samples. And actually also it identified this as a linear section here and here, and again here in the end. And there will be a little difference between the waveforms. For example, if we do compound and we simply do sine. And here we copy that sine and we choose to convert it into, reassemble it into a hand-drawn. Change it. Yeah, we can, let's try to remove one digit and reduce it. And it reduced it by almost 5%. It's not a lot. And we click OK and OK. So here we have an original sign, and here we have a hand-drawn that has been reduced. So what we can do is we can choose to subtract them. And now we see the difference between these two waveforms. You can see a little down here. If we double-click it to play it back, it will actually, here you see, it will it show the difference between those two waveforms, and then it would normalize that, so it really enlarge the difference. But you can see these are the changes between the original and the reduced one, but really exaggerated because it's being normalized. There's not much difference between these two. I doubt you'll hear it. But if you want to, you can choose how aggressive you want to be with the reduction by simply changing that this degree value here. This is the default value, and it's not a lot of reduction. If it depends on your waveform. If your waveform have a lot of linear segments, those linear segments will be reduced. But if you have a segment that's changing a lot, like a sine, it's always changing the direction. You don't have many samples that line up linear, then it's only a few that will be reduced. So this is the setting I suggest you use. If you have a lot of linear, it will reduce a lot, and if you don't have a lot of linear, you will not see a lot of change. I did some small changes to the expression phase converter. So let's do advanced, and let's just do a sine and add a expression. An exponential phase converter. What I changed is the range over here. In this version, in the previous version, you had this all, and you had this one and this one. So you can change both the left and the right side at the same time. In this version, I set it up so you can change it near the 90 and 270% mark. So you instead have this feature or this feature. So it's a small change to this exponential phase converter. When I do hand-drawn waveforms, I like to use this align cursor. I added some versions ago. That if I want to draw something in between and I want to line it up with these samples point, for example, if I want to do a line up here and, for example, go here, and I want it to be exactly over this point, I like this alignment cursor I added so I can see when I'm about this point. It simply, you have this small, the black cursor is your actually Windows cursor, and the blue cursor that's enabled when you check this cursor mark is the one that will use this snapping. By default, it will snap to a sixth of one of these squares. So here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and because the first is actually 0, so we have 6, and you have that both vertical and horizontal. So I like to see this snap cursor as a big cursor. And in settings now, you can choose that it should always be visible. So if I enable it here, and I go in and do a hand-drawn waveform, the alignment cursor will be active by default. And lastly, really small change in this version when you want to connect to another database. If you have multiple, when you test the connection, it will actually show the size of the database. And as you can see, as I said, my sound database really grew when I started importing audio wavetables. And it's these 1,300 wavetables I imported. So these were the changes I wanted to show you. As I said in the beginning of the video, you can look here in the history to see everything that was changed. A few bugs was changed in this version, and I written this known issue that because I added this new feature to import these audio wavetables, they're really large, and it means that if you do something that involves a lot of wavetables, it can take some time. For example, if I go here and I click here and then choose to export all of my audio wavetable, this is my development database, so it's not very big. But it is an operation that can take some time. And for that reason, I gray out the tree view here when I do something. For example, if I want to clone this third party, I only have a few of these audio wavetables that was imported. But if there was a lot, it would take a lot of time, and the program is not responsive when it performed that operation. So to show that, I gray out the wavetable. Let's try to export them. Actually, it was quick. Again, it was only a few, but the same when you clone them. You see here, it's grayed out. It will take a little time to clone them because, as I said previous in this video, when you have these large one, this one, you have this exclamation point telling me the data are not loaded into memory. So in order to clone all of these that are not in memory need to be loaded from the database into memory and then saved to the cloned one. So just beware if you do something that involve a lot of wavetables, it will take a little time, and also simply double clicking a wavetable with these many, it takes a little time before it's loaded, and the tree view is grayed out in order to show that it's actually doing something. So these were the changes in this version.